right, welcome back. Off our conversation with Dr. Edwards, let's talk more about what happened with the Flint investigation this past week with Stephen Henderson from WDET in Detroit today and Randy Richardville, the former Senate Majority Leader in Lansing. I'm really curious as to, Stephen, you had Dana Nessel on your program on Friday morning, I think it was. It's interesting, with all of the hullabaloo and the frustration right now in Flint, I think she's trying to say, look, there's more to come. But where do you think that this is, what drove this?
So I think if you talk with the investigators who are working this case, they all say that they have been surprised at what they call the shoddy work that was done under Bill Schuette on this issue, and that the prosecutions that were underway just were not solid enough for them to continue, which is one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that I think they have seen enough so far in their own investigations to say there's likely to be other kinds of charges and maybe some other people charged who they hadn't charged before. But boy, I think it's an incredible risk to expunge all of this now, right? Say we're going to start from scratch and then expect everybody to come along, not least of all jurors, perhaps, to say this is something entirely different than what we've thought it was before.
Randy, clearly a lot of money has already been spent on this that I guess we're sort of flushing away now, but a lot, maybe more than that to the people of Flint is the time. It all feels like, what, all of that was for nothing? We have to start over, really?
Yeah, I think I've looked at this from a lot of different angles. I wasn't in office, obviously, when this happened, but I watched it and watched what I consider to be one of the most egregious character assassinations that I've seen in Michigan history. What they did to Governor Rick Snyder, a guy who, when the problem was obviously found out, people are throwing rocks and throwing blame all over the place, and he got up at the State of the State, and maybe his greatest strength as a governor was that he wasn't a politician. It could also be considered his greatest weakness, that he wasn't a politician. But he got up and said, look, everybody's throwing blame around, put the blame here. I don't care. Let's put the blame aside and let's start solving the problems. And he's one of the best problem solvers I've ever met in my life. But the blame, everybody turned and threw it at him. They forgot about the Detroit turnaround.
Well, there's political blame and then there's legal blame.
There's legal blame.
Yeah, right. But I don't see where
I'm not sure he was taking on the legal responsibility for it when he said that.
No, not at all, not at all. And I've worked with Rick very closely. I wasn't friends with him before he got elected, but because of fate, both of us ended up in the same room working together on the same problems. I found him to be a very compassionate guy, a guy that puts everything he has into anything that he does, and that there's no way I can believe that he knew anything about this, any kind of cover-up.
And Dr. Edwards really didn't seem, as you just heard him say, he doesn't really see culpability going all the way that far up. Although it was interesting, the subpoenaing of his, I think the governor kind of felt that was showboating. He'd already turned in all of his devices.
He'd already given all of that stuff over. I'm not willing to give him that kind of clean bill of health here because I think we don't know. And this is part of what Nessel's team, and it's not her team, I mean, it's kind of an independent investigation. She's really clear about that. I think part of what they're saying is we don't know, that there's not been the kind of investigation that there should have been into who's culpable and for what, in order to determine what charges should be leveled. So, I'm also somebody who got to know Rick Snyder over the last 9 years and think highly of him in some ways. I have some other criticisms of him. I don't know what his culpability was here because I think the investigation hadn't been done to determine that. And if he is responsible, I think this team won't hesitate to make that clear.
You don't think there are enough motivated people out there to go after Rick Snyder and, just as importantly, Nick Lyons, who devoted his life to children and children's kinds of issues, to put them in the kind of situation that they did for the last couple of years? You don't think there was anybody motivated enough within the Attorney General camp or within law enforcement or from Flint you don't think this is complete? You think we don't know after 2 years, we still don't know?
What they're saying,
if it was there, they should have found something.
If I knew, I mean, if I'd seen the evidence, I could speak with more authority on that. But I think what they're saying And there are some high-powered prosecutors involved in this at this point, people with a lot of experience. They're saying that this hasn't been investigated, that there has not been the kind of evidence collected.
She says there are millions of documents that haven't been looked at. I don't know if that's hyperbole. Millions seems...
She said it was literally millions that they've now uncovered that were never looked at before. And if that's true, then I think it was probably premature to say that how high this goes or who's responsible. I mean, I think we have to wait, and this is the dilemma for people in Flint, I think, is it's more waiting. I mean, how long has this gone on without them getting some sort of resolution and justice in this case? I think after they're done this time, though, we can say they looked at everything there was to look at and determined one way or another what should be done.
Lawyers talk about this wall that they sometimes have to create, and she's on the one side right now. Randy, this is a really strange situation, though, where the Attorney General has to defend the state against civil action, but on the other hand, prosecute those that they feel erred in the name of the state.
Yeah, it's hard to understand what the role is supposed to be, and that actually happened last term, too. I think when that special prosecuting team was put together to investigate Flint, was that political? You could argue it was. You could argue it wasn't. Is this political? Same thing. I think as much investigation into whether it's political or whether it's factual would make sense to me, too. But these people have been, their lives have been hurt. Their families have been hurt. There's some terrible things have been happening to people that
Are you talking about the people of Flint?
I'm talking about all of us. I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about,
But the real harm here was always done to the people of Flint. And the people who are suffering these consequences of prosecution and other things, that's because of their own actions.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Yeah, but it hasn't been allegedly in the press and in lots of other places.
I'm afraid we got to leave it there. Thanks, guys, very much for the conversation. We come back, Dan Carmody on Eastern Market. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.